Napoleon Bonaparte is often remembered as a military genius whose victories reshaped Europe. Popular imagination attributes his success to brilliance, charisma, or superior arms. This is incorrect. Napoleon did not win because his weapons were better. In fact, most of his weapons were ordinary by the standards of the time, sometimes inferior to those of his enemies. What made Napoleon lethal was not steel or gunpowder or even artillery caliber, it was system design. Napoleon transformed war by compressing time, reorganizing space, and enforcing decision. He did not innovate each and individual component of warfare. He integrated them into a single operational machine that moved faster, struck harder, and decided outcomes before opponents could adapt. His genius lay not in invention but in ruthless synthesis. To understand Napoleon is to understand a fundamental law of power. Tools do not determine dominance, systems do. 1. The strategic concept, the strategic context, war before Napoleon. Before Napoleon, European warfare was slow, rigid, and predictable. Armies were professional but limited in size, constrained by logistics, aristocratic command structures, and linear tactics. Campaigns unfolded cautiously. Supply trains dictated movement. Battles were often avoided unless conditions were ideal. War was expensive, methodical, and indecisive. The French Revolution shattered this equilibrium. Conscription produced mass armies. Political ideology injected urgency and legitimacy into violence. Suddenly, war was no longer the affair of kings, it was the mobilization of nations. Napoleon emerged from this chaos as an inventor of new ideas, but as the first commander capable of controlling mass warfare without losing coherence. Where others drowned in scale, Napoleon imposed structure. Section 2. Speed as a weapon and the compression of time. Napoleon's primary weapon was speed, not reckless speed, but controlled, systemized tempo. His most radical form was the corps system. Instead of one massive army moving as a single organism, Napoleon divided his forces into semi independent corps. Each corps had infantry, cavalry, artillery, enough to find alone, sorry, enough to fight alone for a limited period of time. This allowed the army to march along multiple routes, spread wide, forage efficiently, and then converge rapidly at the decisive point. This achieved several effects simultaneously. Operational ambiguity. Enemies could no longer identify Napoleon's true axis of advance. Logistical flexibility. Smaller units could live off the land more effectively. Temporal dominance. Napoleon arrived before enemies could fully concentrate. Napoleon understood a brutal truth. Reaction time is the most valuable resource in war. By denying it to his opponents, he turned even inferior tactical situations into victories. Section 3. Logistics, living off the land and the price of speed. Napoleon's system deliberately sacrificed traditional logistics. Long supply lines were slow, vulnerable, and predictable. Instead, he embraced foraging, living off the land. This decision was ruthless but effective. It allowed unprecedented speed and operational freedom. Armies no longer waited for wagons, they moved as fast as soldiers could march. However, this choice carried a hidden cost. Living off the land works only when the population is dense, the territory is fertile, the local population can be coerced or tolerated. When these conditions vanished, as in Spain or Russia, this system began to cannibalize itself. Napoleon understood this risk but accepted it. His strategy was predicted on decisive campaigns, not prolonged attrition. This reveals a core principle of power systems. They are optimized for a specific environment. Outside it, they fail catastrophically. Section 4. Strategy, concentration, not brilliance. Napoleon's strategic doctrine was simple, cold, and repeatable. He sought local superiority, never fighting fair, never dispersing effort. The manoeuvre de deterre. This strategy aimed not at enemy's army, but at its logistics and communications. By moving behind the enemy, Napoleon cut supply lines, isolated forces, and destroyed morals even before battle ever began. The enemy was forced to fight under existential pressure or collapse without fighting. This was psychological warfare embedded in movement. The central position. When facing multiple enemy armies, Napoleon inserted himself between them, using interior lines to defeat them sequentially. He massed one force with minimal troops while concentrating overwhelming strength against the other. This strategy demanded superior speed, reliable subordinates, absolute command discipline. It worked repeatedly until it failed once. Battle doctrine, breaking the hinge. Napoleon's battles were not contests of attrition, they were engineered collapses. Enemy armies fought in rigid linear formations. Napoleon fixed them in place using skirmishers and limited attacks. Once the enemy committed reserves, he struck the hinge, the point where formations bent, overlapped, or reoriented. Artillery shattered cohesion. Infantry exploited the beach. Cavalry completed the destruction. Victory was not measured by casualties inflicted, but by irreversibility. Once a line broke, Napoleon pursued relentlessly until the entire resistance dissolved. This is the difference between winning battles and ending wars. Infantry weapons. Why Napoleon chose inaccuracy? The standard French infantry weapon, the Charleville musket, was inaccurate, slow to reload by modern standards, and unreliable at long range. Napoleon knew this, he accepted it. Rifles existed, they were more accurate and longer ranged. Napoleon rejected them because they disputed tempo. Rifles slowed reload rates, complicated logistics, and fragmented formations. Napoleon preferred volume over precision, shock over attrition, momentum over marksmanship. Bayonets mattered more than bullets. Infantry existed to fix the enemy, not annihilate them. This choice illustrates Napoleon's central logic. Weapons must serve the system, not the reverse. Cavalry, the weapons of collapse. Cavalry didn't win battles, it ended them. Napoleon used cavalry for reconnaissance, exploitation, and pursuit. One infantry and artillery shattered cohesion. Cavalry ensured that the retreat became rout. This was not romantic shock warfare, it was calculated annihilation of morale. A broken army that escapes intact can fight again. A routed army ceases to exist. Artillery, Napoleon's true domain. Artillery was the one arm Napoleon personally mastered. Trained as an artillery officer, he understood firepower as a tool of decision, not decoration. The Gribeauval system produced lighter, more mobile guns. Napoleon massed them into grand batteries, concentrating fire on a single point until resistance collapsed. Artillery created the bridge. Infantry exploited it. Cavalry finished it. This triad, fire, movement, decision, was Napoleon's signature. At Waterloo, the system failed not because it was wrong, because the conditions, mud, timing, coordination, and neutralized its advantages. The Peninsular War, systematic failure under guerrilla pressure. Spain exposed Napoleon's weakness. Guerrilla warfare attacked logistics relentlessly. Living off the land became impossible. Speed collapsed. Occupation drained manpower. The British exploited this asymmetrically. Funding insurgents instead of deploying large army, it was cheap, effective, as well as devastating. This was the first modern demonstration of systemic attrition, not defeating an army, but exhausting its infrastructure. Napoleon's systems optimized for decisive maneuver, bled dry itself. Waterloo, when the system cracked once. At Waterloo, Napoleon attempted a familiar strategy, but perfection was required, and perfection failed. A subordinate failed to contain the Prussians. Original tempo slipped. Napoleon was forced into reaction. Blucher used Napoleon's own logic against him, converging at the decisive moment. One failure, one delay, one misalignment. That was enough. This was this is the final truth of power systems. They are not defeated by weakness, by the fragility under stress. Conclusion. The law Napoleon proves. Napoleon teaches us a timeless lesson. Weapons do not create dominance, systems do. Speed defeats size, decision defeats attrition, logistics decide everything. Execution matters more than brilliance. Napoleon didn't fall because his ideas were wrong, he fell because no system survives infinite execution pressure. Empires do not die from incompetence alone, they die when the cost of perfection exceeds human capacity. Napoleon was not a conqueror of Europe, he was a constructor of a war machine that and its first casualty.